Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome. Hope you're enjoying this nice steamy weather outside. Trying to think if there's any announcements. I don't think there's really much to keep on your radar. Well, actually, I take that back. I believe the first assignment for Unit 3 has been posted. So if you get a chance, you might want to take a look at that today, especially if you get done with today's studio. I don't remember the due date off the top of my head, but it's on Canvas, so go ahead and check that out. Make sure you're keeping up with those assignments. I really think that's about it. So let's go ahead and dive into today's material. On Monday, you got introduced to Java, and today we're just kind of, moving along that path, that transition between Python to Java. Just to kind of give you a little heads up about what's going to happen next week. If you remember for Unit 2, we spent a lot of time working with a framework called Flask. We use Flask as a framework to help us develop web applications. Starting next week, we're going to introduce you to a framework called Spring Boot, and it's similar to Flask in a lot of ways, but very, very, very different in a lot of other ways. And we're going to walk through a similar process with Spring that we did with Flask, show you how the framework works, and use it to build another application here in class. And so that's kind of where we're headed with Unit 3. As you can, I'm sure, deduce, Spring is in Java. So we're going to be using Java to build similar kinds of applications that we did as in Unit 2. Before we do that, though, I think it's good to get some more practice getting your feet wet with Java, kind of making that transition from Python into Java. So let's talk about what was on the agenda today. We actually kind of talked about this stuff last time because I skipped ahead. I knew I was doing that. Whether you believe me or not, that's up to you. But we talked about these things last time, but it's still good to talk about the differences between how Python does things and how Java does things. Starting with loops. Can somebody name? Let's start with similarities, actually. I know it has differences first, but how are loops in Java and Python similar? What are some similarities between the two? Anybody think of something? For loops and while loops were things in Python. They're also things in Java. For loops and while loops are things in many, 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 many programming languages. So that's the good news. If you know how to write a for loop in one language, you pretty much know how to write a for loop in lots and lots and lots of languages. What else is the same about them? I'm sorry? Switch case, we'll get there in a second. That's kind of down here. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We got switch case statements. What about loops? Any other similarities? So our friend I keeps popping up again. Loop variable called I. We see that a lot. How are they different then? What are some differences, loops in Python versus Java? I'm sorry? Syntax, yeah, so we talked about that last time. No indentation, well, kind of, right? We still want to indent stuff, but it doesn't matter as much, at least not functionally. It's more style in Java. Instead, we use curly brackets. What else is different? That, especially for loops, the structure looks really different. There's those three pieces of a for loop to pay attention to. Initialization, the ending condition, and then the update section. Although we can do a different kind of for loop. Java has a really, I don't know why they call it this in Java, but they're called enhanced for loops. That's the official name for them. It's really just looping through items. What's the equivalent in Python? We'd say for something in, that in keyword, in a list or something like that. So Java can do that as well. What's the syntax for that, for those kinds of loops? How does that work? We have colons. Yeah, we have colons. So both loops are available to us. Both types of for loops are available to us. And while loops in Java and Python are very, 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 very similar. Got to have that Boolean condition involved. So let's talk about if statements then. Somebody mentioned switch case. We saw switch case in Python, right? A little bit. Java does it too. But it's a similar kind of story, or you could even say the same thing for if statements. The biggest difference between if statements and Java and Python is that word that we already said. Well, indentation, yeah, that's one part of it. Indentation's part of syntax, yeah, syntax. They behave exactly the same, right? They behave exactly the same. It's just things are spelled out a little bit differently. In Python, we had if statements that had, what was it, elif, right? How do I say that in Java? I just have to type out the word else, which is what elif means, right? That's where it comes from. I have to type out the word else if. We can do else statements in Java as well. That's all fair game. And then, as was mentioned, the indentation and the curly braces piece applies to if statements as well. Any other striking similarities or differences that people notice between doing if statements and the two? I know I'm going kind of fast through this, but I really hope that this illustrates the fact that learning concepts is important. Syntax also important, but less so in my opinion. Syntax is something that's usually easier for people to wrap their brains around than just general concepts. If you know how an if statement works, you can figure out how the syntax is supposed to work. And the computer will help you, because it'll tell you when you're wrong. All right, let's talk about some new stuff. Last time, on Monday, we talked about arrays in Java. And this time in the prep work, we saw something called ArrayLists. And so in Python, we didn't have arrays or ArrayLists, we just had lists. So on Monday, we contrasted arrays to Python lists. Today, let's talk about the differences between an array list and a Python list. What are some differences between Java array list and a Python list?
You have to declare the type.
Yeah, so an array list in Java is going to store something, right? Some values in it, and those values, the type has to be declared. So I can put integers inside of an array list, or I can put doubles or strings or other objects, right, inside of my array list. That's all fine, but I have to say that at the beginning, and I'm limited to that type of object from there on out. I cannot switch it later on or mix and match different things. What else? What are some other differences? Let's talk about operations. For Python lists, I could do things like append. Can I do that with an array list? Yep, I sure can. For Python lists, we had, that's square bracket notation, and I could use an index, right? Can I do that with array lists? I can, but it doesn't look the same, right? What does it look like with an array list? What do we have to do to get that similar behavior with an array list? Anybody remember? .add? That might actually, I asked you the question, I'm not even sure what it's called myself. It might be .add. I was thinking of a different word, but I think I might be thinking of hash maps, which we haven't gotten to yet. And then if I want to, retrieve something, we have .get, I think is what it is for an array list. What are those? .add and .get are examples of methods. That means that array lists are objects. It didn't even really matter if I said array list there, right? In Java, everything is an object. Everything, well, with the exception of primitive types. That's the one exception to that blanket statement. Everything is an object, and array lists are absolutely objects. So to interact with those objects, we call methods. Call methods on those objects. That gets us to the same place that we had with Python lists. I can put things in, can take things out, can append things. All the same stuff that we did with Python lists, I can do with array lists. And so, I think while we're on the topic, it might be a little useful to discuss what the difference is between an array list and an array, which is what we saw on Monday. What's the difference between an array list and an array? Arrays are fixed in length, so once I declare the size of an array, that's it. It's that size forever. Done. Array lists can vary. They're more flexible. That's actually a large part of what makes them useful. is the fact that they are more flexible when it comes to sizing. Are there any other differences you can think of between array lists and arrays? Syntax is a lot different, right? The arrays got that bracket syntax that Python used for lists. So you can take a Python list and kind of see pieces of it in both an array and an array list. And that's not really an accident. Array lists, as their name implies, do share a fair amount of stuff in common with arrays. But in general, they're considered to be more flexible, which is a large part of why we're introducing you to them. They're very common. They're very popular container objects. And so we have another container object that we talked to you about today in the prep work called a hash map. And hash maps feel a lot to me like Python dictionaries. Why is that? What are some similarities between a hash map and a Python dictionary? Key value pairs, that's the big thing, right? Key value pairs. So, instead of using index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can use anything as a key, right? Can I use an object as a key? Yeah, I can. Absolutely. But I do have that same caveat with hash maps that I have with array lists, right? When I create a hash map, I have to tell it some information about the keys and the values. What information am I talking about? The types. I got to tell it what the types of the keys are going to be and what the types of the values are going to be. And that's it. It's set in stone at that point. They can be whatever types I want them to be, right? But I have to specify that ahead of time. We saw that actually kind of shows up the same way in both. What do I see in the code that specifies the types that an array list is going to have or that a hash map is going to contain? What was the syntax for that part like? Angle brackets, the triangular ones, the pointy ones. That's pretty common syntax. These are not, so both array lists and hash maps are very common examples of what we would call containers. They hold things. They're used to store stuff. They're not the only examples of containers. There are plenty of other containers that exist in Java land. But if you see that angle bracket notation used with an object, that should right away say to you, hey, this is probably some kind of a container. This is probably holding some stuff. And whatever's inside of those brackets is the type of whatever that thing is storing. One other thing, I think they might have pointed out in the prep work, but if they didn't, you should definitely be aware of this. Oh my gosh, I got so many tabs open. So many tabs. If you haven't already, through the prep work or just out of your own curiosity, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to look at the ArrayList API. Just Google ArrayList in Java, and here you'll see the documentation for an array list, and there's our good friends, those angle brackets. It's got this letter E inside of it. E is just a placeholder. E is basically saying, put a type in here. Whatever type you want, put it in. This array list will take care of the rest. And so if we scroll down, we can see what methods an array list has. There's the add method. You had it right. The one I was thinking of was wrong. That happens all the time, by the way. And you can see that there's a lot of stuff available to us that we can use to interact with these array lists. I'll be honest with you. I've used a good portion of these, but I haven't used them all. I haven't had a need to, but it's good to know that they're there in case I should ever run into a situation where it might be useful. And the same thing is true of a hash map. So you can Google Java hash maps and get the same kind of information. So here you'll see there's our angle brackets again. Now I've got K and V for key and value. So this is a placeholder for the type of my key. This is a placeholder for the type of my value. And I can then see what methods this provides to me. So get is retrieving things from my hash map, and then there's a similar method down here called put, which will put things into my hash map. How did Python do this? How did Python do put and get? What would I see in Python? It's been a while, hasn't it? We didn't use dictionaries much in Unit 2, did we? It's our good friend, the square brackets. Pretty sure it's just our good friend, the square brackets. But again, hash map in Java is an object, like most things in Java are. So to interact with it, I'm going to call a method on it, like I do with most things in Java. I'm going to call methods on it to interact with it. That's the pattern, and we're going to hopefully drill that pattern into your head over the next few weeks here. I'm going to create objects, and I'm going to interact with those objects by calling methods on those objects. And soon, we'll create our own objects. We'll define our own objects, which we've done in Python already, but we're going to do it in Java in a week or two. What questions do you have? Anybody have any questions? Is there anything from the prep work you were hoping I would talk about that I didn't get to? Oh, behind the post, I'm sorry.
Yes. If you have an array list, you're trying to assign values statically.
So the question was, if you have an array list and you're trying to assign it values statically? I'm not sure I understand the...
Like, if you know what you're going to put in it, and you just want to
Oh, okay.
put in all the different.
Yeah, okay, I understand now. So I know what values I want to be in the array list. How do I get them in there? Well, one answer is to use this guy right here. This, well, we're on hash maps, not array lists anymore. But you know, one answer is to use the add method and add those elements in one at a time. I don't know if there's a constructor that would let you do that automatically. I don't know that there actually is a constructor. So like on Monday, we saw with arrays that I can use that curly bracket syntax to pre-fill my arrays. I don't know that there is a similar structure with an array list. I think we have to use the add method to insert the values that we want.
Yeah, Doug, I think that's where I was getting tripped up in the pre-work, but you can only add one at a time. You can't add
I believe so, yeah. I believe you can only add one at a time. Now you'll see that there is an exception to that. I see this method here called add all. I can give it a collection. So let's say I already have an array list. And I want to take the values from this array list and put them into another array list. I can use this method to...
You have to add them one at a time to that, right?
Yeah, they have to get there somehow, yeah. Yeah. Now in practice, how am I going to create an array list? Am I going to sit there and type out add? No, probably not. Where's the data going to come from? Does anybody have an idea? User input, maybe, that's a good answer. Not the only answer I would consider viable. What else? Database. Some sort of database, some sort of permanent storage. I'm not going to sit there and type every value in. I'm going to have some data set that already exists in the world. I'm just going to pull values out of that and put it in my array list. Loop through it, yeah, exactly. A lot less code. A lot less of a pain in the butt. Now, I say all that, and then today, what are we going to do? We're going to create an array list, and we're going to add elements to it one at a time. So, you know, you can do it that way, and we will do it that way for some practice reasons, because we don't have a database right now in Java, but we will eventually have a database in Java that we can use to pull out and populate array lists or hash maps or whatever the heck we want. Yeah?
Just through Googling, I found a way to add a bunch of things at once.
Oh, yeah? Do you pass an array, or?
It's like arrays.asList.
Arrays.asList. Oh, okay. So you make an array first, basically, with the curly brackets, and then you say arrays.asList, and you pump it through there. Cool. Thanks, Google. I mean, pop that link on Slack or something. I can imagine that there are probably some other people in the room who would be interested in seeing that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Could you describe a case or a circumstance where Fallthrough actually would be handy?
Where Fallthrough? So you're talking about with like a switch case statement? Where it would actually be handy. So I gotta say, I mean, my first instinct to answer your question is that I don't use it very often. So maybe it's not particularly handy. I can't think, I'm struggling off the top of my head to think of when I've even used it. Although maybe we should take a step back for a second. I know you probably know what Fallthrough is. You asked me the question, but can somebody else tell me what he means by Fallthrough in a switch case statement? Where you don't put a break in there. And so after it's done with one case, it actually just goes on to the very next case. The only thing that kind of pops into my head at the moment is if I have, and I'm thinking in kind of mathematical terms here, so if you're not a super mathy person and you want to tune out for a second, I'm totally okay with that. Where you have sets, and one set is like a subset of a larger set, I could have one case for the subset fall into the case for the larger set and cover both scenarios. That's sort of the first thing that pops into my head. But I gotta be honest with you, most of the time in my code, if Fallthrough happens in a switch case statement, it's because I forgot to put the break in there, and then I'm really confused and angry and upset because my program doesn't work the way I thought it was supposed to. Like 99 times out of 100. That's what it is. It's a good question though. Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm sure out there somebody in the world is gonna watch my YouTube video, a month from now and be like, what the hell is that guy talking about? Fallthrough is awesome. I use it every day. I don't know that guy. So, help me out. People of the future, I'm counting on you to help me out with this one. Any other questions? Yes?
With another one of the exercises, it was asking us to change around the hash map so that instead of getting a student in the grade, it was asking for an ID of students. But when I was doing that, it was originally hit enter without entering a student name to finish the loop and kind of execute it. But then we changed it to an ID, which was integer, but it doesn't let you put like when it's just a quotes with no input there. It's thinking it's a string, but it's a integer since it's the ID, and then you have a mismatch.
This sounds like a scanner problem to me. Does that seem? So I'm not sure, without seeing your code, I'm not sure, what might be causing the exact problem. I'm speculating here a little bit, but the question for people who couldn't hear in the back is, he was working on, I guess it was in the prep work, an exercise in the prep work about using dictionaries, switching it from, was it a string for the key? Originally it was a string, but then they wanted you to switch it so that it's using an ID number, so an integer for the key, right? The scanner object, remember, has the ability to look for values with a particular type. So when I switch over to the integer data type, I probably want to switch my scanner to look specifically for integers. So if you don't put in anything, I mean, did it error out or did it just not do anything? I would imagine in that case, it did give you back a value. We had a value in Python. Yeah.
I tried that.
Oh, really? It didn't work with null either?
No. I looked it up and said it might be returning 0. I tried that. It didn't work.
I doubt it would be returning 0. I highly, highly, highly doubt it would be returning 0. But I do know how to figure out what it was doing, and if you want to flag me down after class, we can step through your code and figure it out. I know that doesn't help you right now, but I would just be speculating at this moment. That is important though, especially, user input. This is something that we talked about a little bit on Monday, but it is very important. Being able to match the data type of what you're looking for to user input. Some people are of the mind that they're just gonna read everything in as strings and then change those strings into whatever type they want to later on. In fact, that might be a solution to your problem. Just read in everything as a string and then try to convert it over to an integer later. That's definitely possible to do. I don't think it was covered in the prep work, but it's totally doable. Might be a solution to your problem. What other questions do you have? I do have an exercise, but I think these questions are great. Any other questions before we hop? I'm sorry?
Python, that seemed to be easy to do, but I don't know. But how do you do that?
The question was, how do you convert things from one type to another in Java? Unfortunately, there's more than one answer to that question. For some things, it's easier than others. So in Java, we can cast things. I don't know. I know how to do this. I was just looking for a good resource, but casting is one way to change types of things in Java. And it's surprisingly straightforward. Oh, come on. I don't know. Oh, no. You crossed the line. You crossed the line. It's not. Oh, really? That page is no good, huh? Thanks for the heads up on that. Yeah. So you can cast things in Java. Still not seeing. Okay, here's a decent example. I put the type that I want to cast it to. So what type do I want it to be? I put that in parentheses in front of the value. So if this is an integer value and I want it to be a double, I could put the word double inside of parentheses here, and then some variable that contains an integer, and it will take that integer value and convert it into a double. That only works with primitive types. For objects, it doesn't work. Well, kind of doesn't work. So there are other ways that you can, you see casting objects is a thing, but you do have to be careful. To go from like a string to a integer, for example, that's possible as well. You have to use a method called parseInt. String to integer in Java, parseInt. Is this website gonna? No, okay. So you can see that there's a method called parseInt that takes in a string, although, is this Java? Oh yeah, it is. It takes in a string and returns the integer value of that string. So it's complicated, I guess, is sort of the answer to your question. Casting works in basic situations. If you're going from an object to a primitive type, or the other way around, a primitive type to an object, that's where it becomes complicated. And we'll see examples of that happen sooner or later, I'm sure. What other questions do you have? All right, let's try an exercise. I got an exercise for you. Let's take a peek. I believe it deals with ArrayLists. You're going to be dealing with hash maps on Studio today. So I came up with an example with ArrayLists. I want to write a method that takes in two ArrayLists of ints, adds them together. We don't even need to write a method. I think maybe we'll just stick with the main method for now. Yeah, we'll just do a main method for now. So let's just try and do this exact problem, right? I want to create an ArrayList that has these values in it, 3, 4, 5, 1. I want to add it to an ArrayList with 1, 6. So you can see 3 plus 1 gets me 4. 4 plus 6 gets me 10. And then this list is shorter than this list. So I want my program to be smart enough to recognize the fact that those lists are not the same length. They don't have the same amount of stuff in them. Does it kind of make sense what we're trying to accomplish here? So I'll sum these values together until I run out. All right? Let's get to work and see how we can make this happen. I've already got IntelliJ booted up. If you don't, then you'll have to catch up with me in 5 minutes after it boots up. I'm going to make a class. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Because we have to, in Java, everything goes inside of a class, right? So I'm going to make a class. I don't want to put it in methods, do I? No, I want to put it in the Java for Python folder. You can put it in whatever folder you want. I'm just being a little nitpicky when it comes to organization. So I right-click Java for Python, and I select New Java Class, and we are adding ArrayLists today, so I'll call it ArrayList Adder. Why not? That's what it is. It's going to add ArrayLists together. Okay. So I really want to focus on the ArrayList today. I could create a method. I need to create at least one method. What's the method that I absolutely have to do? A main. I could create a second method if I wanted to. I think that's not even necessarily a bad idea, but just to keep things straightforward today, I'm just gonna stick with main. We're gonna do everything in main today, just to keep it straightforward. So I'll go ahead and put main in here. Now, some of you, I think, have already discovered this, either on your own or browsing around or whatever. There's a way to have IntelliJ put this in for you, right? So you don't have to type it out every time. And once you're a professional, once you're getting paid to program, you should absolutely do that because, time is money, and writing out this stuff is considered a trivial task for most programmers. But when you're first starting out especially, I think there's a lot of value to actually typing this stuff out and understanding what the pieces are that you're typing out. Understanding that this is the main method with a void return type and a string array of arguments as the inputs and things like that. Okay, first things first, let's just keep it simple. First things first, I want to create these two array lists. I want to create an array list with these numbers in it. I want to create a second array list with these numbers in it. That's all I want to do. So let's just keep it simple. How, whoops, wrong thing. Come on. How do I create an array list? What's the first thing I need to type? Array list. If anybody ever asks you, how do I create a thing in Java, the first thing you need to do is type out the name of that thing that you want to create. Type out the type. So you can see it's already IntelliJ is trying to help me out here. It knows what an array list is. It's trying to help me out. And you can see it's also telling me, hey, buddy, you need those angle brackets. What am I going to put inside these angle brackets? So, yeah, so and I'm glad you said that. And actually, I almost skipped this, but it's worth talking about. Int is a perfectly valuable type in Java. Why doesn't it work here? Does anybody know? It requires an object, and int is a primitive type. So Java, to get around this, you can call it a loophole if you want to, has an integer object type, which is basically trying to mimic all of the things that an int does. That's why it exists. I know that might seem confusing to you. It's still a little confusing to me. I don't know why they did it this way. I mean, I know why they did it this way, but it also is like, well, what the heck, guys? Come on. Why do we need two different ways of representing integers on this computer? There is a reason, and this is prime example right here. All right, we got to give it a name. I'll call it first. What comes next? Equals new. So there's that new keyword. What does new mean? Makes a new one? Can we say that in computer science terms? You're right. Initializes. We have a word for it. Instantiates. I like that word. Now we're talking. Now we're throwing the jargon in there. There's another word that I like a lot as well. Constructs. Constructs. Calls the constructor of an object. Yep. That's what the new keyword does. Constructs an object, instantiates an object. New array list integer. What else do I need? Semicolon? Almost. I need parentheses. This looks a little funny, right? It's like they took alphabet soup and replaced it with parentheses and angle brackets instead. What are the parentheses telling us? Parentheses mean this is it's a method. We're calling a method. Specifically, we are calling the constructor. We're calling the constructor. Yes? Yeah. You're a step ahead of me. In fact, IntelliJ has been yelling at me for the last 5 minutes about that. So thank you. You can see that it's angry at me. There's a little blue block. It knows what I'm trying to do. It's trying to help me out. It's like, hey, I see you're trying to use this array list, but you haven't actually imported the thing yet. And then at the end of that blue box, I know you guys can't see it because the type is so small. It says Alt plus Enter. So if I hit Alt plus Enter, boom. Tacks that import statement at the top of my file. It fixes my problem. For easy stuff, For easy stuff like that, IntelliJ will help you out. But it can't read your mind. It might try to. It'll be wrong a lot. They'll do the best it can. Can't always read your mind. Is that second integer required? Well, IntelliJ is actually telling me no. What does it say? It says explicit type argument integer can be replaced with bracket bracket. So no, it's not. I don't think that it's broken to do it this way. It does look a little redundant to have the word integer in there twice, but it also seems perfectly happy not to have it. And I gotta be honest with you, that's just how I learned it when I first started a program. It might even been that it used to be required and it's not anymore. I honestly don't know. But that's how I learned it. It's been burned into my memory that way. All right, cool. So now I want to create this array list. So we're going to do, we want to put these values in, 3, 4, 5, and 1. So how do I do that? How do I put values in this thing? The add method, right? So I'll say first.add 3, right? And then I'll take this line and I'll copy it so I don't have to type it out again. Paste it a few times. 3, 4, 5, 1. Cool. When I say add, is it putting it on the front of the list or the back of the list? It's putting it on the back of the list. How do you know? Because somebody told you? Because you tried it out and you just saw that's how it did it? What if you weren't sure? Well, I go to the API for ArrayList, which I closed apparently. I would go to the API for ArrayList and I'd find the add method, which is down here. It says appends, so it puts it on the back. It's on the end. Or you'll notice there's actually a second version of add that says I can add it at a specific place. If I know I want it to go in this spot right here, I can tell it what spot I want it to go into. But for our purposes, just adding it at the end is perfectly fine. All right, so one array list down. Next thing we need to do is create this array list, right? With a 1 and a 6 in it. It's going to look a lot similar. So we can go through this a little bit more quickly. Use IntelliJ to help us out a little bit more. Oops. If IntelliJ offers me a solution, you notice I didn't even think about it. If it offers me to autocomplete and it looks like what I want, just hit the return key and it'll spit out the rest for you. I know that seems a little weird at first, but man, is it a time saver. Saves a lot of time. And then we'll add, what were the numbers? 1 and 6. I could put whatever numbers I want into here. I'm just following along with the example. Okay. So I've got 2 array lists with the numbers in them. Next thing we need to do is add them up. What coding structure am I going to use to perform the addition? A loop? Do we care what kind? You like fors? I like for loops too. I like them both. I mean, you know, we all love all of our children equally. I don't have any kids yet. I can't say that. But still, for loop's fine. We could actually do this for loop in a couple of different ways, right? Well, let's actually pause here for a second and think about strategy here a little bit, though. I need to write a loop, right? What am I looping over exactly? The length of the longer one. The longer one is what matters. And actually, I think we might have skipped a step as well. I'm taking 2 numbers, I'm adding them together, and then doing what with them? Putting them in a new list, putting them somewhere else, right? I don't have that destination yet. I don't have that destination. So maybe I should do that first. Let's create our destination, our result. That's one more list. We're getting lots of practice creating array lists today, which is good. I'll call it result. Okay? Now, we talked earlier about how there's two different kinds of for loops, right? I would actually like to solve this problem using both kinds. I think we have enough time. So it doesn't matter to me which form of for loop we do first. Anybody have a suggestion of which type of for loop we'd like to see first? All right, we're gonna do the one with an index then. We'll do that one first. Actually, can we do it both ways? Now I'm second guessing myself. I might have spoke too soon on that one. I think using an index actually makes more sense in this particular case. Yeah, I think it does. Okay, we'll just do it with a loop variable. We'll create a loop variable called I. So what's the first piece? So I declare the type of I and set it to 0. We call that the initialization of my loop variable, right? The second part is, so this is, I heard I less than how do I figure out how big a list is? Dot size. And so first is the longer one, so I'll say first dot size. So that's the termination condition, right? When do we stop? Or when do we keep going? I guess would be a better way of thinking about it. I'm going to keep going as long as I is less than the size. And then the last part, I++, that's our update. That's our update. Okay? So now I'm ready to do some work. Now I'm ready to do some work here. I want to get the values out of these two lists and I want to add them together and then put them in the result list that I created. So let's take that a step at a time. I want to get a value out of this first list. How do I do that? So first.get. Actually, if I pause for a second, instead of going so fast, you see when I type get in here, it tells me it wants an index. It wants an integer index, right? What's my index? It's I, which will be 0 the first time through the loop. Okay? I want to add that to the value from the second list, right? Second dot add, get I. IntelliJ is mad at me. Why? You need to stick it in a variable or do something with it, right? I think putting in a variable is a great idea. I'll call it int s or sum. There we go. Add those two together, store it in a variable, and then what do I want to do with that variable? Put it in the result. Result.add sum. Okay. The last thing that I'd like to do then is print out the contents of my result so that I can check it, make sure that it worked the way that I wanted it to, right? So let's just try this for starters. Result. Let's just try this for starters. We haven't tested any of this code yet, which makes me nervous. If I write too much code without testing it, I start to get nervous, and I'm getting nervous here. I've written a pretty big chunk of code. I haven't tested any of it yet. So what do we do? Let's recap, and then we'll try it out and see what works and what doesn't, and make some adjustments. I created 2 array lists, and I put some stuff in them. I created a third array list, which starts out empty, because I'm going to add some stuff to it later. I looped through the list, added these two things together. and then stuck it in the final array list, the result set. Let's see. Let's find out. I want to test this and see what works and what doesn't. So let's see. Let's go ahead and run this, see what happens. Uh-oh. Red text. Or index out of bounds exception. What does that mean? I went off the end of the array, right? I went off the end of the list. I flew off the end. How do I fix that? Do an if statement. Check to make sure that I haven't flown off the end of the list yet. Do an if statement. Okay? Let's do that. If what? How do I know that I'm still in range? If it exists, so if I go to check to see if it exists, then I'm going to get an error, because if it doesn't exist, it's unhappy, right? If I is less than, so be careful, you said I less than equal to is not quite good enough. Why would equal to? Because we start with 0, yeah. So if I is less than the size of the second one. If I is less than the size of the second one, that means that I'm still inside the bounds, right? What am I missing? Curly brackets. And I think IntelliJ is smart enough to auto indent stuff for me. Oh, thank you, IntelliJ. That was very nice of you to do. All right, we made an improvement. We hopefully fixed a mistake that we made. Let's try it again, see where we're at. I got 4 and 10. Is that what I was expecting? No. Kind of, but no. Yeah. So the way I wrote this if statement, you understand why I did this, right? If I is less than the second one, then I add the two together and right? But I didn't take into account the fact where I still have more stuff here, right? How do I fix that? Else? Okay, let's do an else. Else what? Oh, okay, so this is what I heard. Just grab the thing out of the first one, right? And then put it in. Oops. Like that. Does that seem okay? We're about to find out. I mean, I'm going to run it and see. So actually, I don't need this variable. That's true. I can eliminate this variable. If I want to do it all in one line, I can. In other words, I could do this. Let me comment this out for a second. This line gets us to the same place. Do you see that? What's going to happen? Parentheses work the same way as they did in your algebra class. If I see something in parentheses, I got to go inside those parentheses first, do whatever's inside of there first, and then work my way out. So it's going to go first.get. That's the first thing it's going to do. Well, first it's going to, yeah. It's going to call this method with the value of I, retrieve that value. Whatever value that is immediately going to get passed to this add method and then added to the result. What I had up here before and what I have up here now are functionally equivalent. Is one better than the other? Behaviorally, no. They're exactly the same. So then it comes down to style. In general, this is fairly short. I'm not opposed to doing it this way. If you start putting methods inside of methods, 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 you can see how these lines would get to be very long after a while. Then you should break them up. You should really split them up into chunks. It'll just be much easier for you and everybody else who might have to look at your code to understand what's going on. But if it's pretty short, if it's relatively straightforward, doing this is perfectly fine. If this makes you uncomfortable, don't do it. Make a variable. Do it the other way. That's totally fine too. That doesn't upset me at all. But this is totally okay. Doesn't even work though. We haven't even tested it. Let's try that out. Hey, all right. That seems reasonable. Yeah, cool. Cool. Yeah, that was my next question. Question was, what if I didn't know how long each of these arrays were? Or what if I wanted this to work for any 2 array lists that I might have laying around, regardless of how long they are? That throws a wrinkle into the mix, right? That makes things a little trickier now, right? Anybody have any ideas about how to do that? What would need to change? Let's think about what would need to change if I don't know that the first array is longer than the second array. What would have to change? Yeah. I have to check to see what the difference in lengths is before I even get to the loop, right? So the size of my loop, how many times I go through that loop, needs to be whatever the largest length is. How would you do that? What structure would you use to check? An if statement. Let's do it. If what? Size of the first one, if first.size is what? Greater than second.size, then what? Make a variable, so I'll call it length equals first.size. Okay? Otherwise, the opposite is true, so I want length to be second.size, right? Actually, so I could say else, right? Int length equals second.size. And now for my loop, what do I want to happen? I don't want this to be here. I want length to be here instead. Greater than or equal to? Is that going to have a functional effect? I think you could do it this way. Is this way wrong though? Would be my question. Yeah, second else would pick up the equals. It'll pick up the equals one way or the other. I think this way is fine. Don't get me wrong. I think you could do it this way. I think you can also do it this way, just as long as you're aware. Now, it's mad at me. It says it doesn't know what length is. What? We have a word for that. I heard somebody say it. It's declared inside the if statement. We have a word for that. It's a type of mouthwash. Scope. Length was declared inside of the if statement. Its scope is inside of the if statement. Anything outside of the if statement doesn't know that that variable exists. Scope in Java is based on these curly brackets. This was not in the prep work, by the way, but it's a great concept. I'm glad we ran into this problem. So let me show you how I would fix this. There's multiple ways you could fix this. You could just create an int length up here.
I'm sorry, aren't you making that for loop dependent on that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. But I can't use this variable outside of the if statement because it was first declared inside of this if statement. If I want to use it outside of the if statement, I have to declare it outside of the if statement. Right? That's the problem that we ran into. Let me show you how I would fix this. There's other ways you could do it. I would take the else out entirely. Here would be how I would fix this. Set length to be the size of the second one. Check it to see if that's the right thing to do, and if it's not, just change it. Right? I'm sorry?
That change isn't locked inside.
This guy here?
No, so you say it for the second one. but
Yeah.
Within the if statement, we change it potentially.
Yep.
That can transition outside of the scope and come outside of it.
Well, this is an inner scope actually. So anytime I go inside of brackets, I'm going into a new scope. And the other way, the way to think about it is where do I see this variable the first time? I see this variable for the first time outside of the if statement. So anything outside of this if statement can see this variable. If the first time that I see this variable is inside of the if statement, then the only place I can use that variable is inside of the if statement. If I declare a variable inside of the loop, like this sum variable, I declared this inside of this loop, actually inside this if statement as well. The only place I can see this sum variable is inside of this if statement, inside of this loop. Yes?
You also have done it by returning the length.
Returning the length.
You still had your if else.
Mhm.
You tell it at the end of both if or else to return length.
So-
and then it would come out of the loop.
What does return do for us? Return is used with, I understand where you're coming from. I want to make it clear, though, that return is for methods. Return stops a method in its tracks. Doesn't matter if it's inside an if statement, doesn't matter if it's inside a loop, doesn't matter if it's inside if it's 3 loops deep, 3 if statements deep, doesn't matter. Return statement stops the entire method. Not the loop, not the if statement, but the whole method dead in its tracks. It's over. So if I return length here, if I say return length, it's mad at me for one, but this code wouldn't even execute, wouldn't even get there. We're gonna talk more about methods, absolutely. So we're still not done yet, though. We still haven't fixed the problem entirely, right? Now I've written a loop that's going from I to the length, but I don't know if this length represents the length of the first array list or the second array list, right? Do you see what the problem is? Is this still okay? Can I still? It only works if second dot size is the shorter one. If second dot size is the longer one, I'm in trouble. Do you see that? How do I fix it? Another else? When do I want to do this addition? I want to do this addition if I is less than not just this size, but not just length, because I don't know which list length is talking about, right? I know it's talking about one of the two, but I don't know which one. Doesn't matter. I know that I is always less than length because I say as much right here. So checking to see if I is less than length inside of that loop is redundant. It's redundant. I want to know if I is less, not just if I is not just less than the second dot size, but also less than the first dot size as well. I want to make sure that it's inside of both lists, because if it is, then I can add the two values together, right? If I has not reached the end of both lists, if I have not reached the end of either one yet, then I can take two values out and add them together. Does that make sense? And I just heard somebody suggest an OR statement. You're so close. It's the opposite one, though. Yeah. Let me type this out and see if this clicks in your head, hopefully. If I haven't gone off the edge of the second array list and I haven't gone off the edge of the first array list, there are still more numbers in both lists that I have not gotten to yet. It is safe for me to take those two numbers and add them together. Okay? I know that's a pretty big leap. And the bad news is we're actually still not done yet. We got a little bit more work to do. We're so close. We're so close. But before we move on to the next step, just this if statement right here. Does anybody need me to explain it again? Does everybody understand what's going on here? if it helps put some concrete numbers to it, right? The size of this one is 2, the size of this one is 4. So what I'm saying is if this value, I, is less than both of them, it's less than 2 and it's less than 4, then it's okay for me to take values out of each one and add them together, right? Now we have to, this case here, we did this because the first list is longer than the second one in this example, but that might not be true anymore. We want to be more broad than that. We want to be more general than that. So is this still okay? I have to be more explicit here. I have to be more explicit. Else if what? Careful. So close. If I is less than first size, then I can, that means there's more stuff for me to do from this first list, right? If I is less than the size of the first one, there's more stuff for me to do, so I can grab a value here. We're so close. I know you guys are being champs. Thanks for hanging with me. We're almost done. I need one more else statement down here. Now, I could actually just do an else statement here, but I think it might help to turn it into an else if, just to illustrate what the last condition is. All right, I'm claiming we're done, but we need to take a moment here to let the dust settle and figure out what the heck just happened. So, if I is less than the length of both of these, that means they both still have stuff left that I can use. So I'll grab one of each, I'll add them together, and I'll do it. If this fails, if I get to this if statement and it doesn't work, the result is false, that means that I ran out of stuff. I don't know which one I ran out of. I ran out of stuff from either the first one or the second one. I don't know which. I don't know which one. So I'm going to check. If I have more stuff from the first list, then I'll copy it over. But if it doesn't have to be the first list, maybe it's the second list. If I still have stuff in the second list, I'll copy it over. Does that make sense? I hope. And so, let's test it for starters by making sure that our original example still works, and then we'll go change the numbers a little bit and change the sizes and flip them around and make sure that it still works for that as well. So my original example should hopefully still work, and it does. 4, 10, 5, 1. What if we mix it up? What if I make the second list the longer one? I'll take these two values off, and I'll add more down here. 7, 2. Now the second list is longer than the first one. I would still want it to work, and if it does, it should be 4, 10, 7, 2 would be the results that I would expect. It doesn't break, and it does. So this took a lot of work, right? We took something that seemed relatively straightforward, and it got a lot more complicated. However, my argument would be that it's a lot more useful. I'm not handling a very specific case. I'm handling a much more broad case. I can give you any 2 array lists in the world, and they will work. They will work here. That's useful. Having to be very careful about which one's longer than the other one, that's a pain. This is much more general. This is much more useful. What questions do you have? I think there's probably one question that somebody out there has, so I'll preemptively answer it. I will copy this into a file and slap it onto Slack right after we get done talking up here. And if I forget, somebody poke me and I'll do it. You can absolutely 100% have this code. Yeah?
Maybe this is somewhat unrelated. Maybe you went over this and I missed it. I was actually unable to follow along with some parts because if I have code in progress, open another file, if I exit out of them, but I try to run, even editing configuration, it opens them back up and points out the errors in the other code.
Yeah. So I've seen this with other people as well. IntelliJ is like super duper strict. If I have an error somewhere else, it won't do anything. it throws a tantrum and lays there on the floor until you fix the problem, even if it's somewhere else, right?
So some of them I even commented out, and it's like still having a
I mean, if you comment it out, make sure you save, I guess. But yeah, if you comment so that's one solution, right? Is take the errors out of your code. Duh, I know. Sometimes you might be halfway through a big problem and it's not super easy for you to do that, or it just becomes really annoying. I agree that it sort of becomes annoying. There is a setting in IntelliJ that you can use to tell it to be a little bit more loose about those rules. I'm trying to remember where that setting is. Google, yeah, Google would know. Let's see, do I remember where it is, or am I gonna have to Google it? I'm probably gonna have to Google it. I'm almost positive that there is a way to make that happen though. Where's the project settings? Is that under File? Project structure settings? Not that. Not this either. Yeah, I'll have to Google it. Let's Google it, because I know this is, I know I've seen other people run into this problem as well. Error in other files? I don't know. Ah, here we go. Run code regardless of errors in unrelated project. This is what we want. Modify. Make no error check. So we're getting close. The run debug configuration. Okay. In the run debug configuration, where is that? In debug? Run? Ah, here we go. So the run menu, there's an option called edit configurations. And you can see over here on the left, it might be a little hard to see because I know that the text is small. Actually, what we really want is probably defaults. Maybe. Well, except there's no Java option here, is there? That's silly. Application. It would be application. Application, and then where's the option that we want? Is it? Am I on the wrong screen? Maybe I'm on the wrong screen. I thought I was there. Oh, here we go. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second and let people, I know I was kind of wandering around a little bit, but I think I just figured it out. So to get here, I went to the Run menu and then Edit Configurations. There's a little Defaults section over here, and then there's one for Application. That's what I'm looking at right now. Down here, you see there's a bar. It says Build. Right? I'm going to take that out. So I'm going to click on Build, and I'm going to click this little red minus sign. And then I'm going to replace it by clicking the green plus sign, and I'm going to say Build No Error Check. And then go ahead and hit OK. And I need to test it, so I'm going to come into some code that we did last time. This is what we did on Monday, and I'm going to put some garbage in there. So it's very clearly unhappy. Can I still run this? Let's find out. Yeah. Yeah, I got it. I'm sorry? I don't see... oh, I ran the wrong file. I reran the one that I had before. Array max finder, yeah. Well, it isn't going to build it because, I mean, it's not going to take any changes that I made here because clearly I've got some big errors in it. Or right-click and, let's right-click and run. It must just be running whatever the last one was. It says 12. I don't even remember. Oh, that is the right answer. Yeah, it says 12, but it must just be running whatever the last one was because this one's not going to work. Clearly. with all that gibberish in there. I don't know of a better answer though. This is just, this is from Stack Overflow. I mean, what were the other options that we had? Edit configurations. I don't know. That's the best answer that I have. I think though, personally, going back to what we were talking about, I know I've been on a tangent for a while, but going back to what the original question was, leaving errors in your code, saving errors in your code is kind of frowned upon. I know it happens sometimes, right? We screw up, we make mistakes. But syntax errors, leaving syntax errors in your code is a pretty big no-no. Like, it's one thing to have code that doesn't work right. That happens all the time. But to have code that is just blatantly missing brackets or semicolons and leaving it like that is a pretty big no-no in every professional programming workplace that I've ever been to. You fix that stuff before you save that stuff.
I think if on edit configuration, change it to build. So it was on build project, and that checks the whole everything you got going.
Wasn't, oh, okay.
Change it to build,
Oh, you change it to build instead? Let's try that.
on, it'll keep the error checking on the
Oh, cool. Let's try that. Edit configurations. You're saying change it, so take this off and then change it to just build.
build.
Okay, let's try that. I want to run this guy. It's still running. Yeah. I mean, which is, yeah. That's just how IntelliJ does it. Just how it does it. So, I know that answer may not be satisfying. I'm not honestly particularly satisfied by that answer. Did I save it? I think it saves automatically when you try to run a program. I think it saves automatically. But clearly, so let's think for a second, you know, IntelliJ set it the way that it was for a reason, right? Because IntelliJ is trying to, they're judging you for leaving bad syntax in your code, basically. And that might sound mean, but guess what? Other people are going to do that too. They're going to judge you for leaving bad syntax in your code. They're not going to judge you if you write code that's got a problem, that doesn't work correctly. That happens all the time. But if you write code that is absolutely broken, right? Missing brackets, missing parentheses, missing semicolons, in a professional environment, people are going to be upset by that. So the very long answer, and I know we're learning right now, we're in a classroom setting and we're going to make mistakes, and you just saw this syntax for the first time on Monday. I get it. I'm not trying to shame you guys. I'm on your side. I believe me, I am. But in the long term, I would like you to try and avoid those habits of leaving broken code in your projects. All right. I'm going to leave this broken code in my project because whatever. I'm the teacher. You can't stop me. What other questions do you have before we call it a day? Yeah, in the back. How to fix what? Uh-huh. At the bottom, I click on what? Exclude from, I can't quite hear you, I'm sorry.
Find the error in the program, in the other program.
Uh-huh.
And in the bottom, if you right click on it, you can click exclude from the file.
Oh. Right click on it and somewhere in this list, or?
Once everything's compiled and ran, and your errors come up in that bottom space, you right click on the error, and then click exclude from the file.
Oh, I see. I see. I think I understand what you're saying. We're getting to know IntelliJ really well today, aren't we? That's a good thing. So put it back to how it was. Is this how it was? Let's see. Let's see if this is doing what I thought it was going to do. See, it's still running. I don't know why mine is just being super nice to me right now all of a sudden. It doesn't seem to recognize that I put this big old piece of garbage in my code. I don't understand it. I don't understand what, yeah, it doesn't want to tell me, it thinks I'm perfect all the time, I don't know. I broke my stuff. I broke my stuff by not breaking it, I don't know, it's weird. But if you want to mess around with that, so, you know, figure out what works best for you. You've probably already noticed just from me poking around that IntelliJ's just got an immense amount of options for you to choose from. So don't be afraid to poke around and play around with stuff. Find what suits your style, suits your programming needs. Yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So split up into your small groups. There is a studio today, so go ahead and get started on that. I will go over the studio around 8 o'clock like I usually do. So let us know if you need any help. Thanks.